Activist. He graduated from Harvard in 1974 with a BA in physics. During his college years, he also worked as a staff hacker at the MIT Artificial Intelligence Lab, learning operating system development as he went. In 1983, he announced the project to develop the GNU operating system, a Unix-like operating system meant to be entirely free software. The following year, he resigned from MIT to lead the GNU project and has been its leader ever since. With that initiative, he also launched the free software movement. And in October 1985, he started the Free Software Foundation. The gnu+linux system, which is a variant of GNU but also uses the kernel Linux developed by Linus Torvalds, are used in tens or hundreds of millions of computers and are now pre-installed in computers available in retail stores. However, the distributors of these systems often disregard the ideas of freedom which make free software important. That is why, since the mid-1990s, Stallman has spent most of his time in political advocacy for free software, spreading the ethical ideas of the movement, as well as campaigning against both software patents and dangerous extension of copyright laws. Before that, Stallman developed a number of widely used software components of the GNU system, including the original Emacs, the GNU compiler collection, the GNU symbolic debugger, GNU Emacs, and various other programs. Stallman pioneered the concept of copyleft and is the main author of the GNU General Public License, the most widely used free software.
Free software license.
Free software license. And on that note, I think it's time for me to hand over to Richard Stallman. So thank you so much. We're honoured to welcome you here.
This talk addresses a very broad issue. What freedom do people need in a digital society? Beyond what are the threats to our freedom in a digital society? Many projects say that they're designed to work for digital inclusion or to close the digital divide. And these efforts take for granted that it's good to use computing, that a digital society is something good to be included in. Well, I don't necessarily agree. I think that participation in a digital society may be good or bad, depending on whether it means surrendering freedom. So this talk is about what are the threats to freedom of users of computing, and what do we need to do to make sure that digital inclusion is a good thing. There are many different threats to our freedom in the digital society. One is surveillance. Digital technology could be Stalin's dream. It can make possible surveillance that was never possible before. And we see many governments around the world trying to use it for that. For instance, the European Union requires recording what sites people talk to and saving that data, which is perfect for any new kind of tyranny that might be set up. And it also has made possible saving records of who talks with whom on the phone, which a few decades ago wasn't normally recorded. There were no records of that, except perhaps for the rare long-distance calls. But talking within your city, they didn't know who you spoke with. And the only way to keep those records was to set up special equipment, and in countries with respect for justice, that would require going to a judge to get permission and presenting some kind of evidence. But now all that information is saved, and it's easy to look at for purposes that may be nefarious, such as sabotaging democracy. We know that Bush was caught doing illegal surveillance of telephone calls, and the response of the U.S. government was to legalize it. That shows how much respect there is for human rights in the United States. Now, part of this surveillance is done inside people's own computers. For instance, just putting your portable tracking and surveillance device in silent mode is not going to protect you, because it continues sending us saying where you are. In case that reference wasn't clear, I'm talking about a portable phone. It's still sending out signals saying where you are so that they know you're still here. And it can be turned on, most of them can, in eavesdropping mode to listen to my speech. Now, I don't mind. Anyone was welcome to come here and listen to my speech, and people are making recordings which are going to be published, so they don't need to listen to me through your tracking and surveillance device. So you might as well switch it off. In fact, you might as well take the batteries out, which is necessary if you want to be really sure it's not sending out any signals. So what we can see is that digital technology can work against us in a harmful way. If you purchase anything with a credit card, then there's a company that knows what you bought and where you were. So I don't do that. Unless it's something where I'm required to identify myself anyway, I only pay with cash, because I'm not going to give Big Brother any extra information. I feel it's every citizen's duty to poke Big Brother in the eye. But surveillance is also done through systems totally beyond our control. For instance, the surveillance state in the UK has established total surveillance of car travel. There are cameras in the streets recognizing license plates and keeping an up-to-the-moment database of where every car has gone. And this should not be tolerated. It shouldn't be allowed, because surveillance is dangerous. Of course it has some acceptable uses, like catching thieves, except for the really big thieves in the banks. It's not going to catch them. It's only going to catch small-time thieves that steal physically from homes. But the biggest use is crushing democracy. When you have a state that's inclined to use police to besiege protesters and squeeze them together, you can't let the police have more power. The police in the UK have already used the surveillance of car travel to sabotage protests by arresting people before they get to the protest. So you can't protect yourself from that by doing something yourself. The only way is to demand government that respects democracy. Now, in a free society, people are not guaranteed anonymity in their movements. If you go on the street, people may see you, they may recognize you, and they may remember it. But this is diffuse information. If somebody wanted to track you by asking lots of people where you went, they could do it, but it would take a lot of effort. And therefore they don't do it very often. There has to be a very good reason to go to that much trouble. But with digital surveillance, The information can all be collected and recorded in a central way such that it's easy for anyone to use for any purpose. Recording information about what people have done in the past is very useful to any tyrant that comes to power. Once a tyrant is in power, people realize they need to take precautions. But if the tyrant gets access to records of what people have done in the past, well, it's too late to take precautions. The data was already recorded when you didn't think it was necessary to take precautions. And information such as who phoned whom can be very useful to the tyrant, because that means if you know this person is a dissident, well, look at the person that he spoke with, the people he spoke with. They might be dissidents too. The next threat I want to mention is censorship. The internet gives us a great way to communicate, but it's threatened with censorship, and this is no longer limited to obvious tyrannies such as China and Iran, where we know freedom is not respected at all. You now find censorship of the internet in many countries, including there's filtering of the internet in Denmark, Italy, France, and there's a constant push to impose this in more places. Denmark's list of censored sites is secret. The first rule of censorship is you don't talk about censorship. They didn't want the citizens to know what they were being blocked from seeing. So the list was leaked and posted on WikiLeaks. So Denmark censored that too. Australia's government has been talking about censorship of the internet for several years, but it has been blocked. However, there's already censorship in Australia on making links. In fact, Electronic Frontiers Australia was ordered to remove a link to a foreign political website on pain of being fined $11,000 a day. So this is political censorship. The usual excuse, or when they establish such censorship systems, they find some kind of excuse, some kind of publication that people find disgusting. Either because it has to do with sex, or maybe it has to do with extreme political views. But these don't justify censorship. I have seen works that I consider disgusting, like the movie Pulp Fiction. That was really disgusting. I intend never to see anything like that again. It was disgusting for its violence, but I'm against censorship of that. I've seen people express views that I consider disgusting. For instance, people have stated racial prejudice that made racial insults against groups, including me, but that's not a reason to censor them. And this sort of freedom of opinion, freedom of expression is under grave threat in Europe now. People have been convicted or charged with crimes in France for making insults against groups of people. Someone who burned a Quran in the UK and posted a recording of this, was charged with a crime for posting basically a statement of his opinions. And this is tyranny. Now, I don't agree with those opinions, but I recognize that freedom of speech is nothing if it's limited to opinions that I agree with or opinions that you agree with. The crucial case for freedom of speech is the freedom to say things that we don't like. And then the ultimate excuse for establishing censorship is so-called child pornography. I say so-called because usually the definition includes people who are hardly children anymore and might even be legally allowed to have sex. But if they make recordings of this and send those recordings to their lovers, they can be charged with a grave crime and are in danger of imprisonment. A representative of an international organization of record companies said at a conference, "We love child pornography because it's a great excuse to impose filtering on the internet, and once the filtering is in place, we can easily extend it to something else." Censorship is extremely dangerous, and we mustn't accept any excuse for censorship. Digital technology makes censorship comparatively much easier because it can help in the censorship as well as help communication. 10 years ago, people were saying that they thought that the internet would be resistant to censorship, but what we see is censorship can be imposed if a government is willing to go far enough and spend enough money. In the 1960s, China had censorship. There was no internet, but there was censorship, and it effectively cut off China for the most part from the rest of the world. That had various detrimental effects. Nowadays, China puts a lot of effort into censorship, but it manages to do this without cutting China off from the rest of the world for most purposes. So it has eliminated most of the detrimental effects and still manages to control public opinion in China by preventing more than a tiny fraction of Chinese people from finding out the truth of what's going on around the world. Interesting things happen, though. People posted announcements calling for protests in China, and the main result of this was that the police roughed up some journalists who were there to see if any protest was going to happen. So the result was embarrassment for China externally, but most Chinese people won't find out that this happened. So we can't assume that censorship will fall flat on its face, that it will be totally ineffective. We have to fight against it. The next that I want to mention comes from data in formats designed to restrict users. Many programs store the user's data in a secret format to restrict what the users do with their own data. This is common in user subjugating proprietary applications. It's designed to make it impossible for the user to take that data to do other things with it. They can only access their data through that one program, which is clearly designed to make them prisoners. In addition, most distribution of audio and video is in formats that more or less restrict the user. Sometimes the format is secret. For instance, lots of distribution of video is done in secret formats. Italian public television distributes in a format called VC1, which is an official standard that is secret. You can only get a copy of this absurd standard with a non-disclosure agreement. Machine-readable copies are available for rental. And this format is implemented on Microsoft Silverlight, which mainly seems to be a platform for secret media formats. Well, it's a very bad thing for that to be used at all, but in general, it's absurd for a public entity to communicate with the public using a format that is secret and designed to restrict the public. Oh, by the way, I think the BBC does it too. The BBC distributes in a secret format for a program called iPlayer, which was again designed to restrict the public. This should not be allowed. Other formats are patented, and the patent holders attack free software implementations and thus restrict the public. MP3 is an example. People have developed free software to work with MP3 format, and the patent holders have threatened them. I believe the patent holder the patent is controlled now by Thomson, and that Thomson is responsible for these threats. The usual video formats such as MPEG-2 and MPEG-2 and MPEG-4 are also covered by patents, and they're being attacked. This is why when my talks are recorded, I insist on distributing them only in OGG Vorbis or OGG Theora or WebM formats, because these are non-restricting formats, at least as far as we know. Another threat to our freedom comes from software that the users don't control. In other words, non-free software. With software, there are only two possibilities. Either the users control the program, or the program controls the users. If the users have certain essential freedoms in using the software, then they effectively control the software and can control the computing that they do with it. But if the freedom is insufficient, then the program controls the users and denies their freedom. Because the owner of the program controls the program, and the program controls the users, so the owner controls the users. The program is simply an instrument to give the developer that power over the users, power which is unjust and which no one should ever have. This is the issue which the free software movement is concerned with. The idea of the free software movement is that the users deserve freedom, deserve to control their computing, and therefore they must have the freedom it takes to do that. Proprietary software, being a system of unjust power, should not exist. And our goal is to put an end to that practice, to eliminate that social problem. The freedoms that are essential for the users to control the software they use are the following. Freedom 0 is the freedom to run the program as you wish. Freedom 1 is the freedom to see the source code and change it so the program does your computing as you wish. Freedom 2 is the freedom to help others, the freedom to redistribute exact copies of the program to others when you wish. And freedom 3 is the freedom to contribute to your community. That's the freedom to distribute copies of your modified versions to others when you wish. If the program comes with these 4 freedoms, then it's free software because the social system of using and distributing that program is an ethical system, one that respects the user's freedom and the social solidarity of their community. But if one of these freedoms is missing or insufficient, then the program is unjust proprietary software because it imposes an unethical social system on its users. So the use of a free program in society is development. The free program is knowledge, and then maintain it, adapt it, and extend it. However, the use in society of a proprietary program is not development, it's dependence. Impose dependence on a particular entity, and that's a social problem. Our goal should be to put an end to the use of proprietary software. To develop a free program is a contribution to society. How much of a contribution depends on the details, of course. But writing a proprietary program is not a contribution because it's a power grab. That program's social effect is to be a trap. If it has attractive features, those are the bait for the trap. They don't make it better, but rather more of a problem. So if you have the choice to write a proprietary program or nothing at all, you should to do nothing at all. It's better if you do nothing at all because that's not doing harm to others. Developing a proprietary program is doing harm to others. So the aim of the free software movement is that all programs so that all the users can be free. We aim for the liberation of cyberspace and all of its inhabitants. We hope that you will escape